A big ceremony celebrates the start of a new term for Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. But the main message, it's time to get to work.
We have the opportunity and the obligation to get this right.
We'll hear the governor in his own words on the mission to fix school funding and give property tax relief. And new concerns about car sales in Texas, how a surprising shift could affect the roads you drive in the Lone Star State. Hello and thank you for joining us. For State of Texas, I'm Josh Hinkle. Bold promises for big achievements. That seemed to be the theme for Tuesday's Texas inauguration. Crowds came out on the north side of the Capitol to see Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick take the oath of office. Both leaders promised action on property tax reform while also improving funding for public schools and teachers. Here's what the governor had to say on education.
The eyes of Texas are upon us. We have the opportunity and the obligation to get this right. We can and we will better fund education in Texas. We will pay our teachers more and reward achievement in the classroom. We will reform a school finance system that robs from one district to pay another district. We will put our students on a pathway to having all third graders reading at grade level by the time they finish the third grade. We will prepare our high school students for either college or a career, and we are going to do all of this without a court order telling us to do it.
The governor then turned to the other big topic in his inaugural address, property tax reform.
So, while one generation is struggling to climb the ladder of success, others have a ceiling on how high they can go. A ceiling imposed by an archaic property tax system. A system that punishes families, punishes businesses, and prevents younger Texans from being able to achieve their dream of home ownership. Think about this. Just a few blocks from where we are right now, you see cranes operating above sprouting skyscrapers. In the shadow of those cranes are businesses that are shuttering, unable to keep up with skyrocketing property taxes. Go a few blocks further, and you'll find residents who are being forced out of their homes, victims of unaffordable housing, a byproduct of those same skyrocketing property taxes. This is not what Texas is all about.
Most Texans are familiar with the problems the governor talked about in his address, but he also offered up a few ideas for solutions. Wes Rappaport takes a closer look.
We must finally rein in skyrocketing property taxes in Texas.
In his inaugural address this week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott reaffirmed the state's commitment to reforming its property tax system.
It does worry me. I think about it all the time. I think about, at what point do I say I can't do it anymore?
Brendan Sipple of North Austin is counting on lawmakers to bring him relief.
They're taxing a lot of people out of their houses, like myself. I mean, when I built this house 22 years ago, my property taxes were, I want to say $2,800 a year, which is doable. Now they're $9,000, and the only reason they're that low is because I've fought them for years.
Texas must limit the ability of taxing authorities to raise your taxes. And taxpayers should be given the power to fire their tax appraiser.
Last year, the former chief revenue estimator for the state told lawmakers he was skeptical Texas could come up with a successful long-term plan.
History would imply that we can't have periodic successes in bringing down property tax or limiting its increase, but a permanent solution that makes everybody happy may be hard to come by.
Sipple knows he's not the only one in a bind.
I'm sure there's people that are in worse situations than mine.
But he's cautiously optimistic he and his neighbors will see changes this session.
I'm hoping that we have the right people in there to tackle it and see what's going on.
Wes joins us now. This was supposed to get solved last session. What happened?
Well, lawmakers tried to set a new cap on the property tax rates, and neither chamber really could agree, Josh. You know, the Senate came in at 4%, the House came in at 6%. No results there, so the governor called a special session. Didn't get done there either. Lots of other issues that ended up kind of getting loud and getting in the way there. So the governor then put out a tax plan last year. In his new tax plan, he sets the cap at 2.5% in his proposal. So we will see if they can meet somewhere in the middle this year.
Well, what's different this time? I mean, why are a lot of state leaders and lawmakers hopeful there will be some kind of progress?
Well, what we're seeing, Josh, is some of these moments of unity that we've talked about at the start of this session. You know, there was this press conference between the governor and the speaker and the lieutenant governor. All three of them saying, you know, this is the first time in recent memory that we can, recall the three top leaders of the state, returning to these weekly breakfasts, returning to these press conferences that are happening here. And so, we have seen this bipartisan support for changes to public education, to property taxes. Will it be more of the same? Maybe, but we'll just have to wait this one out.
The Texas economy is giving lawmakers more money to put towards schools and tax relief, but one part of the economy is showing signs of a slowdown. Why it could affect how you drive in Texas.
Do you love me? Do you want to be my friend?
The king of country music took the stage at Greg Abbott's inauguration celebration. Why the governor said he had to have George Strait play, and it's not just because he likes his music. The economy in Texas is booming, according to a new report the state uses to forecast its state budget. But there's one surprising outlier. Texans are not predicted to buy as many new cars and trucks as they did in the past few years. Politics reporter Phil Prazen went to find out why.
All day people have corrected me. When I say Texas is a car state, people tell me, you mean it's a truck state.
A lot of the big trucks that you actually see are really clean and never get off the road. A lot of people with the flash, they want that big expensive diesel truck.
Texas sets the national tone for trucks and SUVs. But this year, auto repair workers like Tom Ellis notice people are driving their vehicles longer.
Because the repair is usually cheaper than the payments every month.
And for the first time in years, Texas is expecting to collect less from the motor vehicle sales tax. That somewhat took the state's accountant off guard. Comptroller Glenn Hager says it's a combination of micro and macro economics.
People, one, are holding their cars longer, in part, two, because they go further, and then secondly, because of interest rates ticking up. And then thirdly, really younger generations would prefer, why do I want to own a vehicle?
For now, motor vehicle industry leaders are not worried.
You may see some plateauing, but again, you have to remember you're plateauing at a very, very high level.
The head lobbyist for the Texas Automobile Dealers Association, Rob Brazil, says this is a low after Hurricane Harvey.
Yeah, here's another one.
The disaster destroyed vehicles across Texas and caused double-digit spikes in vehicle sales. He hopes this tick down won't turn into a trend. Texas, he says, is still a car state.
More a truck state.
And even if you aren't planning on buying a car or truck anytime soon, you still care about how many are sold, because the more that are sold, the more money is dedicated to Texas roads. In Austin, Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
Texas voters passed a constitutional amendment, Prop 7, in 2015, directing money into the state highway fund, but only one of its two benchmarks are being hit. The first part requires the state to deposit up to $2.5 billion of state sales tax revenue into the state highway fund. But that only starts once sales tax revenue exceeds $28 billion. For perspective, sales tax revenue hit nearly $32 billion in fiscal year 2018. The second part of Prop 7 requires the state to deposit 35% of state motor vehicle sales and rental taxes into the state highway fund, but only after that pot hits $5 billion. However, it's never hit that level before, and it's not expected to do so in the next 3 years. And there's no easy fix. It was a constitutional amendment, and any changes that lawmakers make to that formula would need the approval of voters.
One of my friends, she was a teacher before, and now she's an engineer, so she works less hours, but she's making twice as much money
long hours and low pay. It's chasing some top teachers out of Texas classrooms. Now state lawmakers are getting more specific with their plans to raise teacher pay. Up next, we'll turn to our roundtable for an in-depth look at this issue and other big news of the week in Texas. A $5,000 raise. That's what lawmakers want to do for Texas teachers, and the state's top leaders say they're on board. Steffi Lee looks closer at the proposal and how it would work.
I have side jobs where I do photography work on the sides. I do some curriculum writing. I do teach summer school during the summers.
Samantha Kessler's story is a common one, and her principal here at Maida Early College High School's seen low teacher pay drive her own friends away.
One of my friends, she was a teacher before, and now she's an engineer, so she works less hours, but she's making twice as much money.
Senator Jay Nelson just filed a bill, Senate Bill 3, to give every teacher in the state of Texas, all 350,000 and across the board $5,000 raise starting next year and continuing into the next year and continuing into perpetuity.
Music to Samantha's ears.
I'm a single mother, so raising my kids on my own and knowing financially that I don't have to work all summer and that I don't have to work over breaks or find a job at night would be great.
Senator Jay Nelson's bill is estimated to cost $3.7 billion in additional funding in the next two-year budget.
Appreciative and excited.
The Association of Texas Professional Educators is pleased with the bill, but hopes it will be amended to extend to all teachers, even if they don't have a physical classroom.
Things like SPED pullouts, English language learner pullouts, remedial coursework pullout. So they may not be a homeroom teacher, but they're still definitely a teacher, and we want to make sure that they get captured.
I dream that it would happen. It'd be great. It would be such a relief.
Steffi Lee for State of Texas.
We want to give you a better understanding of the two base budget proposals in the House and Senate. The House proposal paints with a broad brush. It would increase state spending on public schools by $7 billion. The money would reduce the impact of the current Robin Hood system on property taxpayers and make funding levels for districts more equal. The Senate's plan has more specifics, including that $3.7 billion to give every public school teacher a $5,000 pay raise. Remember, lawmakers have to make these one bill during the 140-day legislative session. For perspective, we turn to our roundtable. Joining us, Will Weissert with the Associated Press, Ross Ramsey, the executive editor for the Texas Tribune, and Jerry Strickland, the Texas director for BGR Group, who used to work in the Abbott administration. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
So, a lot of talk this week about school finance, and it seems like the House and Senate really want to pump more money into it, but they have very different ideas. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, you know, the first big hump is to get over they both want to put more money into it, because this has always been a stumbling block before. The House put in its initial budget up to $9 billion, depending on how you count, $7 to $9 billion in new money, and was a little inspecific about how to spend it. The Senate put in more specific amounts. For example, they said we want all the teachers to get a $5,000 pay raise. That'll cost $3.7 billion, and that's a school finance number, but it's directed spending. So the House is a little high, the Senate's a little low, but they're moving in the same direction.
The governor's pledging more money for schools as well as tax relief for property owners. That hasn't worked out before, so how's this session going to be any different?
You know, I think one of the things that you look at here is, and one of the messages that we heard on Tuesday during the inaugural was, wouldn't it be nice if we just did this without a court order? That hasn't happened in a long time. Governor Abbott certainly, as Attorney General, dealt with school finance for a long time, realizes the ins, the outs, the pitfalls that there are. And I think when you look at, towards the end of the campaign, when he pushed out a 40-page missive on school finance and what he wants to do with it, that is not a campaign-type issue and a time to do something like that. I think that really signaled in terms of what they were wanting to do, how they were wanting to do it, and really kind of elevated the priority that it was going to have.
You know, nationally we've been hearing so much upheaval and protests about teacher pay. That's really been a big part of what the school finance conversation has been here too. $100,000 for some top teachers is one of the proposals.
Right. Well, that's, especially on the Senate side, there's been a lot of talk about that. Those kinds of protests we have not seen in Texas. They've been a big issue in other states. I'm really interested to see what Jerry was talking about. There is no court order this time, so it's easy to see a lot of discussions happening, both sides really wanting to spend a lot more money, but not necessarily hammering out the agreement. And, if there's no court order saying they have to do it, maybe nothing gets done. Or maybe you get work on property taxes. Though there's a promise cut there, but there's no money that's approved on the other side. So what do? You punch a big hole in the budget, and then maybe we go back to court again, which is how we got here in the first place. So, I do think that there's goodwill on both sides, but it's really going to be in the details. We got a lot of time, but it's not going to be easy. Never is.
And then you have immigration, a lot of talk this week about the battle for money for the border wall. It seems like it's hit a stalemate, but this week Governor Abbott has also been talking about warning President Trump, don't use Hurricane Harvey money to help pay for this wall.
Well, right. It's one of those things where, if you build a wall or you're looking to build a wall and you're looking around for sacks of money, there's this Harvey thing. The Texas delegation, Jerry knows this, the Texas delegation and the governor's office and everybody else had to fight to get the Harvey money that they got, and they don't want that sack of money rated for some other project.
Will that make a difference, you think? That warning?
I think it will make a difference, and this is why. When you talk about the state of Texas, you've got a large congressional delegation. Even though mostly Republican, and now they're in the minority, especially in the House, you still have folks who have clout. And you also have other states who are also requiring a lot of rebuilding money when it comes to that. You've got Florida, you've got New York, obviously Puerto Rico, California with the wildfires. This is over $100 billion we're talking about. They're zeroing in on $15 billion of Army Corps money. If you want to talk about the Army Corps problems and the issues that we have down in the Houston area and you want to take that off, you saw 6 Democratic members of Congress join in on this, on something that dealt with the border wall. I think that says a lot.
Well, this week also, former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro, he launched his campaign for president, but a lot of folks are still watching another Texan, Beto O'Rourke.
Yeah, Beto's on a bit of a walkabout, as you'd say in Australia, right? He's having a roast beef sandwich in Kansas, and he's running through Oklahoma. I think there's a lot of excitement. There are groups in early voting states in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and Nevada that are raising money for him, would really like to see him get in the race. And it just seems like he's not ready to make a decision quite yet. And he's sort of trying to do his unorthodox thing, where he's hitting the road and writing about it. There's already been some pushback saying that, his observations, because he's a white male, might be a little bit different from some of the other people. And meanwhile, the field is kind of forming around him. So we'll see how long he can keep this up. We've got 22 months, right, before we vote. So it's certainly, there's a lot of time. But, I'm not sure that his posts are going to get that much more attention if he keeps writing about sort of the same things over and over, sort of the same tone.
Well, let's not forget, he just finished what was a slam to the end in November. He hasn't had a day job for a couple of weeks. So he went from all out to putting the brakes on pretty fast. Obviously, that's got to be a very big change for him.
It's a little like the love child of Jack Kerouac and Jimmy Carter. I mean, he's out there in a car all alone going across America. The line, somebody in our office mapped it, the line from El Paso that he has taken so far to Kansas happens to point directly to Iowa. We'll see what happens.
A lot of critics, though, are saying that he's not prepared to be president. A Senate run is a lot different than a presidential run.
I think that's true of a lot of these candidates, and it's been true in past races. That's what they said about Donald Trump. It's what they said about Barack Obama. It's what they said about George Bush. I mean, there's always a question about whether you can make the turn, and really that's part of the test of a presidential race is, when you get out there, are you up to it? Can you negotiate your way through a conversation about, Southeast Asia? There are a million questions, and for Beto O'Rourke, that's certainly going to be one of the issues.
Gentlemen, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I knew I wanted George Strait to come perform in this inauguration.
The governor calls on the king of country to celebrate his inauguration, but hear why there's more than music behind this command performance. The most important moments from the Texas inauguration came from the governor and lieutenant governor, but a few people they invited to the celebrations also drew a lot of attention.
When you have an event like this, you need some extra security. So I said, you know what, could you put a Texas Ranger behind me? So I called on Cordell Walker.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick introduced actor Chuck Norris, a longtime supporter. Patrick also gave a shout out to Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham. Governor Abbott also had a big star on hand to celebrate his inauguration.
That's my name.
The king of country music took the stage Tuesday night at Abbott's inaugural ball. The governor said he knew he had to have George Strait play, and not just because he likes his music. He reminded the crowd of how Strait stepped up to help Texans hit by Hurricane Harvey.
After Hurricane Harvey hit the coast, George Strait reached out to my office and said he wanted to help out. And so we paired up and we went together to Rockport, Texas, where George Strait has a place himself. We went to a parking lot of a hardware store in Rockport, and there were people there who had no power, some people who had no homes, but they showed up because George Strait gave them a smile and some hope and some inspiration to rebuild their lives.
The governor also praised Strait for headlining a benefit concert that raised more than $5 million for hurricane relief efforts. He earned the title Texan of the Year for his work. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.